Hello, and thank you for listening to this re-recording of the first webinar in our HSPI webinar series on some basics of implementing POGIL activities in your classroom. During this session, we will share some tips and ideas on classroom arrangement and also some beginning facilitation practices. This webinar was originally presented by Pat Ligon and Amanda Zullo, who you see pictured here. Pat is a chemistry teacher at Broughton High School in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Amanda is a chemistry teacher as well at Saranac Lake High School in New York. Both also served as editors, associate editors, in our high school POGIL initiative, which you'll hear some more about later, and have been using POGIL activities in their classrooms for several years. Unfortunately, we had some issues with the recording during our first webinar. So what you're getting today is a re-recording of that webinar read by me, Cindy Wingenroth, and I am the coordinator of the high school programs for the POGIL project. So I will be doing my best to summarize the content that was shared during that original presentation. And if you have any questions or comments or need clarification of something, my email address is there. Feel free to contact me with those questions. Yeah, I know that we will have a variety of experience levels listening to these webinars. Some people who have been to POGIL workshops and events and some people who have not. I want to start with a disclaimer that I really encourage everyone who's interested in using POGIL in their classroom to attend a workshop or a live presentation if at all possible. But we do want to give just a little bit of an overview of the history of POGIL and how that came about. So those of you who have not had the opportunity to go to a workshop at least get a touch of what POGIL is. POGIL began in the early 1990s, or the seeds of POGIL, when a group of undergraduate chemistry professors really became dissatisfied with the way their classrooms were running. They were interested in moving beyond the traditional lecture format into something that was more student-centered. And so they started trying to do some research on different kinds of techniques and getting together through trial and error of things that worked in their classrooms, that didn't work in their classrooms, and eventually founded upon the idea of combining cooperative learning techniques, so having students working together in groups with assigned roles, usually groups of 3 or 4, on specially designed activities that they created that followed a learning cycle and a constructivist learning theory model. So the activities were all written that they begin with a model for students to explore, gather information from, extract data from, and then that model is followed by a series of leading questions that help the students develop a concept, some core concept or deep understanding of the course material that they were trying to reach. And that evolved through trial and error into what we know as POGIL today. So the process-oriented, that's the cooperative learning piece where kids are working in groups to develop those critical thinking, problem-solving, communication skills. And the guided inquiry learning piece, which is the specially designed activities. Again, I encourage you to sign up to attend an event or at least read some more about that on our POGIL website, pogil.org. So as those professors got together and shared their POGIL activities and shared the success they were having, they received funding from the National Science Foundation to go on and disseminate that further. And they started doing presentations at lots of different venues, different large conferences, holding their own workshops, and high school teachers started attending those events, became very interested in having activities that they could use in their classrooms to implement this methodology at the high school level. And so through that demand, the High School POGIL Initiative, HSPI, was born with the 3 goals of developing a collection of activities that were appropriate for high school. And the HSPI, this first part of the HSPI focused on activities in chemistry and biology, both first year level and AP classes. We also work to train teachers to be able to share POGIL with others and to be better implementers in their own classrooms. So there was kind of 2 sides to the training, to learn to share POGIL and be a workshop facilitator, but also improve facilitation within their own classrooms. And then also we work to develop a net of high school users. And that active work is what happens on the website through our high school user groups. And that network is who is trying to put on these webinars to share information further. And all of that was funded through a grant by the Toyota USA Foundation, began in 2008, and we're pleased to say that we are wrapping up application of those materials this year. So moving on, today what we want to cover in this webinar are three main things. We want to share some examples of how POGIL looks in different classrooms. That's a question that I often get. How can I do this in my room? My room has this limitation. So with pictures and photos and personal experiences from our facilitators to share with you on that. We want to secondly discuss the importance of using student roles and role cards, and we have some samples to share with you in that. The big things that our high school teachers find is that successfully using groups in their classroom requires effort in teaching and covering the point of roles, and so that's an important piece of POGIL in the high school. And then we also want to share just some general beginning classroom facilitations and techniques. And all of these topics are covered more in depth on our POGIL website in the implementation guide, and that's available linked under the resources tab of our POGIL website, and also through the high school. You will find just hundreds of tips and files and photos and points that have been shared by teachers who are implementing POGIL, some great resources for you to look through there as you're getting started in your own classroom. So here we are with arranging your classroom. The very first point that I'm going to share is that you really need to optimize your space. Look around your room and think, how can you move things so that you can get kids together in groups of 3 or 4. That's what we recommend. Less than 3 is really just a pair. You don't get the same kind of synergy, and more than 4 becomes somewhat problematic depending on the level of your students. So 3 or 4 seems to work well. You have to make sure that you allow room for you to circulate around between and amongst all the groups. The point of doing this kind of active learning is for you to be able to hear what the students are saying, how they're developing the concepts, what they're thinking, and the only way you can do that is to be able to get around to the groups. So make sure in whatever arrangement you set up, you are leaving space for you to move and maneuver between and amongst the students. We recognize that everyone has limitations. There are different kinds of furniture in the classroom. Some people have to share classroom spaces between teachers. They travel. I know teachers that push a cart between rooms. And so you have to allow and figure out ways to have time to rearrange, to set up your room and tear down your room each period. But it does happen and it does work. Let me share some pictures with you next. This is a science classroom. And you can see here students some of them are sitting, some of them are standing, or lab table, and that's one way that groups get together, out of the desks in the middle of the room off to the lab tables at the side. This picture is kind of a funky picture. It's taken with a fisheye lens, so it has a little bit of a curvature to it. But you can see in this room, kids are mixed in different of settings. Some students are standing at lab tables towards the back of the room, and some have just turned their chairs around and are working at a kind of a bench situation, so they just rearrange their chairs. This is a more traditional looking lab classroom setup with kids sitting around lab tables. And here's one where the classroom has those chairs with the fixed tablet arm, and the kids have just turned their chairs around, pulled them together into groups, leaving some space in between them. This teacher reports it's a little more challenging in this setup because those tablet arms don't give you lots of room to write, but they make it work. They balance and they make it work. And here's for you undergraduate folks, a picture in a lecture hall. We have people using POGIL in all kinds of different situations. And so here's one of a large class with several hundred students, and they're working in groups. You can see the big picture. Depending on how good your eyesight is, you can see some spaces between the groups. They sit in groups of 3 or 4, leaving a chair between them. The picture on the right shows a group of 3 with a recorder in the middle and 2 people leaning in to gather together. Some lecture halls, I know they do pairs of 2 and 2, and they turn around in their chairs to go back and forth across rows. Group work can happen even in a large lecture hall. The next thing we wanted to cover, the second goal of this particular webinar was to discuss the importance of student roles. It's something that has been overlooked, I think, in group work, and especially at the high school level where you have students with varying social skills. It's really important that you have defined roles with jobs for each student to do within the group for the groups to function well. Our teachers like to use cards that have specifics of the roles listed, and we have files. They have shared those different files that they've made of role cards, and those are available in our implementation guide on the website under student roles. And there you can see in this picture several of the cards. They tend to copy them onto brightly colored paper. Most people laminate those cards as well, so they're durable. But by using different colors, you can tell at a glance what role a particular student is filling. There are dozens of roles and names that people have given to them, but typically fall into these kind of 4 groupings. Someone who is the manager, sort of in charge of the group. We'll go through the points on the slides. Just to start, manager, some groups call it the student facilitator. A second role is a spokesperson, so that's the person who kind of speaks out for the group. A quality control person, and an analyst. So let's go through those in a little more detail. The manager is first, and this person's job is to make sure that the group starts, that they're getting on task quickly, that they stay focused during the activity. They're kind of the leader. They take care of time management. They make sure that everyone in the group has an opportunity to speak and be heard. And they may determine some other roles during the activity, like who might be a reader, who might need to go pick up materials. Use this in other situations too, not just when they're doing a group POGIL activity. They might use it in a lab situation as well and have a manager assign people to pick up materials for the lab. The second category of role is the spokesperson. This person's job is to communicate with the teacher. And it's really important that as the teacher, the facilitator, you are reinforcing that role and not talking with the others in the group, making sure that the spokesperson is doing the talking for the group. This person is also supposed to ensure that all the group members have had an opportunity to respond to a question before they ask for help, so they're making sure that input gets around to everyone. They ensure that people agree about a question that needs to be asked of the teacher. And they also are the person who does the reporting out and presents information to the class when asked. Looks like our slides are taking a moment to load moving forward. Okay, next is our quality control person. And this person helps to guide the consensus building, making sure that all group members are agreeing on responses and writing down on their individual papers. So they verify kind of the written product of the group. Something to note, all of these roles we've tried to, or teachers report that they have found using terminology that might be used in industry is a help in getting students roles. So that's why you see things like quality control and manager, roles and responsibilities that people might have in the work world and tying that back into your classroom. Okay, so the quality control person verifying that all responses are on paper, that people have filled out their papers correctly, that the answers written is what the group consensus answer, and that people are writing high quality answers, and that if revisions or changes have to be made, that everyone records that accurately. The last role that we're going to discuss is the analyst role, and this person observes the group dynamics, how the group is working together, and responds and comments on that. They report out to the group on that kind of group performance, and they complete a report if it's asked. Some teachers also have this person do calculating or some of the tech pieces of an activity if that's needed to be done. So in summary, it's really important to use roles to help students know each person's responsibilities within the group. You can rotate roles by activity, by the day, by the week, by the month. It is important to track the roles that students have served in so that everyone's getting a chance to be all the different roles, getting that experience. And a lot of teachers just have students write at the top of their paper what role they were that day. There's also a form in the implementation guide, if you're anything more formal, to record what roles each person within a group was serving. And you'll also find in that implementation guide a list of lots of other optional roles like recorder, math checker, encourager, all kinds of things. I'm next going to show you a short video that's going to show some students in roles in action, and you'll see their descriptions are a little different than some of the ones we just covered, but kind of fulfilling the same function. This video was created by one of our writing partners in the HSPI project, Mary Sullivan, who is a chemistry teacher at Bellevue Christian School in Bellevue, Washington. And this was a student-produced video. I think it's really cool that students did this as one of their projects for the year, and I think they did a great job. So we're excited to share this quick video of roles in action.
In the POGIL classroom, each person is assigned an individual role, and we work together as a bench. With each person responsible for their individual role, it's easy to stay on task and learn the materials.
As a manager, my job is to make sure that we all stay on track and finish on time.
As a technician, I'm responsible to get out all the equipment for the experiment, do the calculations, as well as clean up the materials.
As document control, my job is to make sure that we all keep on track with our papers, make sure we have all the same things written down, and make sure we all come to the same conclusion.
As the encourager, I'm responsible to make sure that everyone at the bench has a good attitude.
As a reader, my job is to read through all of the questions and the read this boxes and make sure that everybody knows where we are starting from.
As the spokesperson, I'm responsible to report out the consensual answer of our bench. If our bench is unsure of an answer, we are allowed to ask a nearby bench of their answer before we reach a consensus for our own group.
By having these individual roles and tasks, we are able to come away from each activity with a better understanding of what we did and are able to do it better in the future.
Okay, so Mary Sullivan's class, and again, showed some different roles that students use in their building. Again, you need to work in your classroom in your specific situation, but the important part with roles to remember is to use them, to have them. Assigning students that job so that everyone is responsible and everyone contributes is a key to having a good cooperative group. All right, we're going to move on to the third point that we wanted to cover in this webinar, and that is some basics of facilitation. Beginning to be a classroom teacher facilitator rather than lecturer is a big change, and I'm going to refer you once again back to the implementation guide on our website. There are just lots and lots of tips that people have shared to point out for you over the years that they have learned, points that have helped them be more successful. But just some very basic things. You're starting with assigning roles. Our teachers shared that most of them choose the manager of the group first, and they do that randomly. Maybe the person sitting closest to the window or a door, or whoever has the closest birthday to the day, or who lives closest to the school, something like that. And then they have the manager assign the other roles. Some people allow the manager to just do that free form and then record who does what so they can rotate around from that point. Some people always have it be something like the spokesperson is next, they are to the right of the manager, and then the quality control person is next, they are across from the spokesperson. So they do it from location around the table. It's really up to you and what works, but starting with assigning roles is sort of a first piece of the facilitation puzzle. Another thing that's really important to the classroom is to develop a signal that you are going to use to quiet the room and collect everyone back together. Because groups are working individually, there is noise in the room, and not everyone is looking at you, and so you need to generate a way that groups are going to catch on, that they need to pause and come back together class. So some things that teachers do is they raise their hand, and when the manager sees that the teacher has raised their hand, the managers all then raise their hand, and the students notice and stop talking. Another signal is sometimes teachers will ask to help with controlling the pace and the timing of the class, how many more minutes do you need to get to a certain point in the activity? And ask the managers to use 1, 2, or 3 fingers to indicate 1, 2, or 3 minutes to get to that point. Some people use a clap, where they make a sound and the managers repeat the clap back. Some people have a bell that they ring to draw attention back. Some people use a timer. We have some links, some online timers within our implement guide that you can use. Project that up on the board so that the timer counts down to a stopping point in the activity. And I'm sure there are lots of others that you can come up with of signals that work, flashing the lights, those kinds of things. But it's important to have a signal, and even though they're high schoolers and college students, to practice the signal so that everyone knows what it means and some reasons why you need to do that, to draw the room back together as a whole. Observations. As you're walking around, you may be noticing certain things happening, consistent loops, some things you want to point out. You might have overheard something, a misconception, something that you want to draw attention to. So your observations. To pacing, that's an important part of keeping your groups together in generally the same time frame. So you may need to pause and stop to check where people are in the activity and to just get everyone back on the same pace. And you're also going to pause and collect the room together to have students report out. We're going to actually do a whole webinar, different ways of reporting out a little later in the year. So that's something you want to tune in for, because that is an important part of doing checks for understanding, having those groups report out and keeping it interesting by doing that in different ways. It's important to remember that facilitation of a POGIL classroom is active. Some people equate lecturing with being active, and having the students working in group, teachers not active, and in a POGIL classroom that really is not the case. It's very important that you remain engaged with your students, that you are moving through the room, that you are listening for what their conversations reveal to you, that you're interacting with the groups. And again, we'll point out the importance of spending time early in the year to train students on what it means to be a good manager, to train students on what it means to be a good spokesperson, to train students on how you give appropriate feedback as the quality controller, the process analyst. And so by moving them and hearing their comments, you're able to reinforce the good and help correct some of the things that need corrected. So stay active. A few other just miscellaneous points. Sometimes you want to have kids, remind them to go back and reread when they're asking you questions. POGIL activities are designed that the information is contained within the activity, that the activity is the source of information for the student, not the teacher. So it's to send them back, draw them back to the models to reread, to find the data and the information as their source of information. Sometimes you need to stop and give a little mini lecture. I know some teachers use a rule of 3. When the third group asks the same question, it's time to stop the whole and roll out that mini lecture and share some information for the full group. Doing those group check-ins, reporting out, and monitoring answers. I can look back at the facilitation guide. You'll find under the resources tab on the POGIL website or through the high school tab on the POGIL website to get all those important tips that we've collected over the years from our teachers. All right, I want to show you more video. Again, this was from Mary Sullivan's classroom, and she's going to talk a little bit this time about her role as the teacher, as the facilitator in a POGIL classroom. And you're going to see some different examples of ways that she has students report out. You'll see her moving through the room. You'll see her interacting with groups. So it's kind of a great wrap-up of those basic facilitation things you want to be looking for.
As the teacher in a POGIL classroom, I act as a facilitator for student learning. My primary tasks are defining the goals for the day, setting a reasonable pace, monitoring student learning, and managing group frustration levels. We use a signal to gain students' attention. This helps all of us to make transitions more smoothly and efficiently. Each day, I choose 3 to 4 questions for a mini quiz. Each question is based on one of the learning goals from the previous day's POGIL activity. To monitor how well students are understanding, I read over students' shoulders, I stand and listen to students' discussions, and I ask student groups to report out their ideas in a variety of forms. Reporting out to the whole class allows each group to check their work against the other groups. It also allows me to know which groups may be heading down the wrong path. How do I decide which answers to have students report out? I carefully choose questions for which the correct answers are critical to student success in completing the next portion of the activity. This allows reorientation as necessary. The time it takes for students to report out can range from a few seconds to a few minutes. Occasionally, when the group frustration level gets too high, I will intervene and help a group to work through a difficulty. In a typical class period, I spend very little time up front actually lecturing or talking to the whole group. Most of my time is spent carefully attending to what's happening within groups. My mouth is tightly shut. My eyes and ears are wide open.
Okay, so Mary gave us some great examples again of teacher moving through a POGIL classroom, what happens on kind of a day-to-day basis, seeing some reporting, and just watching how the teacher serves as facilitator in that class. All right, that brings us to the end of tonight's webinar, or this webinar. We have 5 more set up for this series that we're producing. Next month, February 16th, Amanda Zullo will be sharing a course structure alignment with standards. We'll be talking a little bit about how you fit POGIL into your existing curriculum. On March 15th, we're going to talk about POGIL assessment and communications, how you use assessment in a POGIL classroom, and also how you communicate what you're doing with important stakeholders like superintendents, like parents, like students. April 19th, we're going to spend some time really digging into what a POGIL activity looks like, so a POGIL activity up close, all those components that we briefly mentioned tonight, the models, the scaffolding of the questions to help lead students to a particular understanding. We'll be taking a real close look at that. May 17th is going to focus on student groups and managing groups So we'll spend more time on student roles that night. We'll also talk about some tools that people use to select groups, how they put their groups together, what they do if they're having trouble with a group, some of those real day-to-day points that you need to work on with learning. And our final webinar in this series is going to be on ways to report out and also help students make connection to the next topic in a course, make connections outside the classroom to what they're doing. We want to point out a couple of resources. The activities that the high school group has developed are now available through Flynn Scientific. 2 of the collections, there's going to be 4 collections total, but 2 of them are ready at this point. POGIL Activities for High School Chemistry and POGIL Activities for High School Biology. Those are the first-year courses. The AP Biology collection we anticipate is going to be released in April of this year, and the AP Chemistry collection we anticipate will be available in January of 2013, so a year from now. And there's the link again to the implementation guide that I've referenced several times. It really is a rich resource for you. These short videos that we saw are linked there. There's also a lot of other video resources, file resources, picture resources for you to look at as you're figuring out how POGIL can fit in your classroom. So last, we want to thank you for participating. Again, encourage you to experience POGIL hands-on at a physical workshop. Go to the events page on the POGIL website to see what's available, what might be coming up close to you. I know that we have 2 introductory workshops scheduled, one for March, one for April. One is in New Jersey and the other one is in Ohio. And then we have our summer regional meetings that will be available. I think they're mostly in the month of July, but check that events page for registration information, and if you can get to a presentation, that would be a really great start for you in putting POGIL into practice. If you have any other questions, or again, you can direct them to me, Cindy Wingenroth, and that's my email, cindy.w@pogil.org. Thanks so much.